All right, so this is part two of my homework. So I read that if you give a mouse a cookie, it's definitely a little more challenging when you don't have kids to kind of feed off of. I think that was a big challenge for me. I'm teaching, I got an internship credential, so I'm actually teaching the bigger kids, which actually I wouldn't have minded doing like seventh grade, but I just started, so I didn't think it would be necessarily appropriate to be able to do a read aloud with them. Um, because I'm still a fan of it. I think even as as I get older, I think it's fun to read with them. So I definitely think that that in itself was a little bit more challenging because you don't really have the kids to kind of feed off of when you're telling your story. So I think that was kind of a challenge. Um, but I did pick if you give a mouse a cookie. I think it's good because it's repetitive. It's kind of the same. Process for each page, each storyline. And so for somebody that's in seventh grade, or I'm sorry, seventh grade, somebody that's a second grader, it's going to be easier for them to kind of pay attention, also to be able to predict kind of the next steps. And so I think this is a great example, especially when you're dealing with English language learners. The prediction factor is probably really helpful for the kids and helpful for you when you're reading to them. And it's a fun story. I mean, I think, because you're always like, okay, what's the mouse going to do next? Or what's the kid going to do next with the mouse? And so I think for that part of it, it's super fun for them and it kind of gets them more engaged and actively learning in the story. And so for me, I think that was a big part of why I chose this book. Also, my kids love it. So they love this book. And what's also good about the book, too, itself is that there's a lot more storylines with it. So I always think it's really good if you can get books that have ones that they like, the students like, but also there's multiple series to the books. Then it's kind of nice because they've already are invested in this character. Then they can, okay, when the next story comes along, they're a lot more engaged and wanting to know what, for example, for this one, like what the mouse is going to do next. So for me, I think that was why I kind of, I chose this story. I think talking about when I was reading it, kind of going over, asking them questions about, throughout it, kind of relating back to their personal things, do they have a mouse? Do they have a pet? Would they give them these things? And so I think that it makes the character more relatable when you're talking to them about their own personal experiences. And I'm sure at one point in time they've swept, they've cleaned something up in their house, and that's kind of what this little boy has done with the mouse. So I think that that's something, asking those questions and helping them relate to the story is going to be helpful, especially for your EL learners, because you're bringing in outside application to their own personal experiences. So not just with EL, but I also think incorporating with all of our learners, I think that's what is really important. The book is very simple, and so I think that it makes it easier. You don't have to modify or adapt the vocabulary, even for second grade, because I think most of them kind of know and understand what everything is. So that kind of helps when you're reading the story. But then again, it could give time and better understanding to be able to say, okay, well, what does it mean to cut your hair? That kind of stuff. So I think that you could incorporate something like that into it. I didn't for this particular read aloud, but I probably could have done that based on the amount of EL learners that I have in my classroom. Might have been something that I could have done. But I did, talk about, oh, does he look full? Noticing how his stomach's big and that kind of stuff. So it gives them kind of a visual understanding of, oh, when I'm full, I do feel, my stomach feels full and that kind of stuff. So again, it's kind of relating personally back to them. I think that always helps when you're reading to kids, because when you relate things back to their own experiences, it definitely helps them for when they are reading themselves. So I also did prediction at the end, because it's kind of an easy build up, because when he says he's thirsty, then, for me, I was able to ask the student, say, okay, what do you think is going to happen next? And so for me, that's when I was able to say, okay, guys, what do you think? So it's a way of them predicting what's going to happen at the end of the story. So we talked about, I said, okay, what do you think? And then of course it's the milk. And then I said, okay, what do you think about the next thing that he's going to probably want? Which we know, based on the storyline of the book, we know that he's going to want a cookie at the end. So so it kind of shows how the prediction of what the character of the mouse is going to do. And so I think that is a good way to read to the kids that way, especially for this book. It's really good because it kind of helps introduce them to a storyline of what happens in the beginning, what happens in the middle, and what happens at the end, and how it kind of all ties in together. And especially when you're writing and you're teaching them about writing, especially when you're talking about when they're writing like a little small paragraph, they know, okay, they've got to introduce something and then they have to conclude it. So this is a great book that kind of shows how to conclude something. So if you wanted to, you could tie this into a writing lesson, which would be really great for the kids, because you're going to talk about sequencing in your writing. So this would be a great book to kind of introduce that topic to. Definitely, probably, again, I think with the challenge of not having the kids with me, I think would have maybe changed how I went about with the questions with the students. I think probably would have been a little bit different had I done that. Since I didn't really have any kids, I couldn't really talk about any interruptions or any of that kind of stuff. But I guess for me, it's just like redirecting their behavior, refocusing. If a student were to have gotten off topic, then it's redirecting them back to the story. Of say, okay, boys and girls, what do you think that he's doing next, or what do you think is going to happen after he sweeps the floor? What do we do after we sweep the floor? So I think that would have been my way of trying to redirect them back to that. What could I definitely do differently? I think I probably would have maybe talked about the predictions a little bit more, like, okay, especially with the mopping and the sweeping, I think that probably would have been an easy one to say, okay, he swept. Now, what do you think he's going to do after he sweeps? What do you think he's going to want to do after he sweeps? And that would have been a good way for the kids to be like, oh, well, what do you do after sweep? Somebody would say, well, my mom mops, or I help mop, or something like that. So I probably could have done that when I was reading to them. Would have probably made a big difference as far as that goes. But I definitely think, unfortunately, because I'm teaching middle schoolers, I don't think I'll have as much opportunity to do the read alouds to get better at it. But definitely, who knows? I may move down to another grade level in a few years. I may end up going back into a lower grade level, but I definitely think that it's super beneficial to read out loud to the students at any age. I'm a huge fan of it. I think it gets them excited about the books and gets them excited about understanding, reading comprehension, what happens in the beginning, the middle, the end, all of those things that are super important when you are teaching your students. So yeah, so I think I answered most of the questions. If I skipped any, I apologize, but this class probably is by far the class I've learned the most, because I don't have as much experience in regards to reading fluency and teaching reading. So I was kind of looking forward to this class itself and learning about this class and how to help and better with the reading. So I was excited to do this class. So thank you so much and have a great day.